CIA officer on India trip reports Havana syndrome. What is known about its symptoms and causes so far? Havana syndrome refers to a set of mental health symptoms that typically involves hearing certain sounds without any outside noise being present, nausea, vertigo and headaches, memory loss and issues with balance. A US intelligence officer traveling with CIA Director William Burns has reported symptoms of Havana syndrome while the two were in India earlier this month. The development, as reported by the US media, has apparently angered the CIA Director and could lead to an aggressive escalation in case of an adversarial power was found to be involved in the attack. This is the first instance of the phenomenon being reported in India, at least on record, and could have diplomatic implications. What is Havana syndrome? Havana syndrome refers to a set of mental health symptoms that are said to be experienced by US intelligence and embassy officials in various countries. It typically involves symptoms such as hearing certain sounds without any outside noise being present, nausea, vertigo and headaches, memory loss and issues with balance. As the name suggests, it traces its roots to Cuba and to late 2016, about a year after the US opened its embassy in Havana. Some intelligence officials and members of the staff at the embassy began experiencing sudden bursts of pressures in the brain, followed by persistent headaches, feeling of disorientation and insomnia. According to a 2018 report by the New Yorker, between December 30, 2016 and February 9, 2017, at least 3 CIA officers working under diplomatic cover in Cuba had reported troubling sensations that seemed to leave serious injuries. When the agency sent reinforcement to Havana, at least 2 of them were found with similar symptoms. The New Yorker article said specialists studied the brains of the victims and determined that the injuries resembled concussions like those suffered by soldiers struck by roadside bombs in Iraq and Afghanistan, but there were no signs of impact. As the mental health of its officials began to be impacted, US withdrew them, dramatically reducing the strength in its embassy in Havana. The Havana syndrome has had lasting impact on mental health of some US intelligence officials, with at least one officer being compulsorily retired for his inability to coherently discharge his duty and another needing a hearing aid. Has it been reported anywhere else? Since the Cuban incident, American intelligence and foreign affairs officials posted in various countries have reported symptoms of the syndrome. In early 2018, similar accusations began to be made by US diplomats in China. The first incident reported by an American diplomat in China was in April 2018 at the Guangzhou consulate. The employee reported that he had been experiencing symptoms since late 2017. Another incident had previously been reported by US head employee at the US embassy in Tashkent, Uzbekistan in September 2017. In 2019 and 2020, such incidents have been reported from within the US, particularly in Washington, D.C. One incident was even reported at the Ellipse lawn adjacent to the White House. According to US media reports, in the past few years, US officials have reported around 130 such attacks across the world, including at Moscow, Russia, Poland, Georgia, Taiwan, Colombia, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Austria, among others. According to a New York Times report last month, Vice President Kamala Harris was delayed for 3 hours as she was about to fly to Hanoi, Vietnam, after US official in Vietnam reported Havana syndrome symptoms. What are the causes of Havana syndrome? No one is entirely sure, but initially during the Cuban experience, being in a country that has been hostile to the US for over 5 decades, the suspicion was on Cuban intelligence or a section within the Cuban establishment that did not want US-Cuba relations to normalize. It was initially speculated to be a sonic attack. However, further studies by scientists in the US and medical examination of the victims began to suggest that the victims have been subjected to high-powered microwaves that either damaged or interfered with nervous system. It was said to have built a pressure inside the brain that generated the feeling of high sound being heard. Greater exposure to high-powered microwaves said only to be interfere with the body's sense of balance, but also impact memory and cause permanent damage. It is suspected that the beams of high-powered microwaves are sent through a special gadget that Americans have been calling microwave weapon. There are also theories that perhaps an adversarial power is using the weapons to actually either interfere with US surveillance systems in various countries or glean information from the same, the human victims being collateral damage. After all, the microwave as a counterintelligence tactic has been experimented with since the Cold War, and both Russia and US have made attempts to weaponize it. There have been reports of US embassy officials in Moscow experiencing mental health issues due to suspected use of microwaves in the 1970s. A BBC report this month quoted James Corgiono as advisor of the Pentagon and professor in neurology and biochemistry at Georgetown University, saying that China and Russia have been both engaged in microwave research and could have repurposed tools developed for industrial use. However, after almost 5 years of data collection, experiments, and medical examination of victims, the US has yet not been able to come up with any conclusive evidence suggesting that microwave weapon is a reality. No one seems to yet have an idea what the mechanics of this weapon is and how it functions. There is also a question mark on how the so-called weapon is able to specifically target individuals and not affect all people in its range. Some medical experts in the US have begun to completely debunk this theory, calling the syndrome of physiological illness amplified a widespread fear of being targeted. The BBC report quoted Robert W. Wallow, a professor of neurology at UCLA, calling it a mass psychogenic condition where, as opposed to the placebo effect, a mass of people, when struck with anxiety of being targeted, begin to feel sick. Who is doing this in India? Sources in the Indian security establishment say they are not aware of any such weapon in the possession of Indian agency. Even if this one, it is unlikely the government would admit to having acquired such counter-espionage technology given the sensitive nature of intelligence work. But why would India and Indian agency target the US? Given the geopolitics of today, they are closest friends, an intelligence official said. So could a foreign country use Indian soil to target US officials? Sources say it is highly unlikely. If we are to assume that Russians or the Chinese have been able to bring in such equipment without our knowledge, once such a thing comes out, it negatively impacts relations between our countries and theirs. Why would they risk that unless they want to hurt us as well? Another intelligence official said. Sources in the security establishment said as yet there has been no reporting of Havana syndrome in Delhi. We have not come across in the past 5 years. None of our intelligence officials have such either reported being a target of such a thing, a senior intelligence official said. A former raw officer who was in service at the time Havana syndrome was first reported said at that time, or even that, there were no reports in Indian officials suffering this at any of the embassies. Without discounting US anxieties over it, another former raw officer said it, if a foreign power is doing it, why will it they target the US alone? Why aren't other countries reporting the same? Barring there has been no such reports from officials of any other country anywhere in the world. This is not to say the US assertions may not be true, but it's a curious case. Thank you.